Have you ever tried to record something using a camera that's low on battery, and then once you think you're done, you realize you never actually hit record, and then the camera dies? Me neither. It's never happened. Anyways, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Church Online today. Got a couple things coming up. Last up is going to be the recent birthday boy Conrad sharing a sermon. So feel free to wish him a belated happy birthday on the internet, or if you happen to run into him. Before that, there's going to be a video from Winkler Bible Camp, just an update kind of on where their ministry is at and the last year in particular. And then before all of that, we're gonna have a worship song. So I'm going to sing one, and you guys can sing along if you feel comfortable, or pray along, or just whatever works for you, whatever sort of helps you engage with God in this moment, and prepare yourself to listen to what He has for you today. So the song is called Christ Be All Around Me. It's probably going to be new for a lot of people. That's okay. Don't plan on singing it in church anytime soon. It's just one that I really like and wanted to share. If you like it, you can go find it on our church's Spotify worship playlist. So just look up Crossway Elm Creek on Spotify. The lyrics will be somewhere up here. And just again, as I'm singing, just try to use this next couple moments to just sort of, acknowledge God, recognize His faithful presence with you, no matter where you're watching this from, or kind of how your week went, or whatever it may be. He's there with you right now, and this can just be a time to connect with Him. So, here we go. Arise, strength of God, go before, lift me up,
Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this Winkler Bible Camp video report. Needless to say, this past year has created a lot of firsts for all of us, and this video message is a first for me. I enjoy trying new things and changing it up, but I would have never guessed that I would be doing a video report to connect with the people that we can't connect with. It seems crazy, it might be crazy, but it's the only way we can connect right now. So, where do I start? Well, the first thing I'd like you to know is that we never stopped working at camp. We just shifted our energy. For a ministry of our size to just stop isn't a healthy decision. We have to try to keep key elements of our ministry running. We have to try to keep our core staff in place, because if we don't, we have a very difficult time getting back up to speed when circumstances do allow us to. So, what happened at Winkler Bible Camp this past year? Well, near the end of March, when the COVID pandemic became our reality, we already had over 1,600 campers registered. At the beginning of May, we made the very difficult decision of closing camp, knowing that it would affect and impact thousands of children and that we would have to refund $300,000 worth of camper fees. We did give the parents the opportunity to donate and to carry over their camper fee, and thankfully many of them did that. This left us with a remaining balance of $225,000 that we made a loan for. We were eligible for the government subsidy, and that has been a real blessing because it has been keeping our full-time staff employed. Behind the scenes, while all these decisions were being made, we made plans with our site team and our maintenance team, knowing that they needed to keep busy. Well, virtually all of our rentals would be gone, so we decided that we would take this time and fix. We made a huge list of all the work that needed to be done. We separated it into 3 categories. What can we fix for free? What can we fix for under $100? And what's going to cost us more than $100? And we started with the free stuff. That was a great decision, which resulted in many improvements for our site, and our maintenance people are still working off that master list. However, as we were dealing with the immediate and the obvious, a few big questions still needed to be answered. But what about summer camp? What about the children? What do we do with an empty site all summer? How can we stay connected with our campers and our staff? Well, questions like that helped determine our direction for this last summer, and here's where that led us to. We removed the old ropes course, the old zip line, and the old bikes course. We removed a bunch of old trees that were mature or falling down or ready to fall down. We split all the wood, we removed all the brush, we dug out all the stumps, and we did all the landscaping. We did all of that work to create room for new activities and a new obstacle course that are going to be a blessing for many, many years to come. This was a big job, and it took a bunch of work, but we did it in a very affordable fashion because all of the heavy equipment and the supplies we needed to do this so far have been donated by farmers and businessmen. What a fun way to build. We created Wonder World, a 9-episode video series that was created and written by our staff to connect with the younger segment of the campers. This past summer, we released a new episode each week, and each episode had an interactive piece that many children responded to. Getting that done took much more work than we anticipated, but it was worth it. We ran our LDP, or Leadership Development Program, as 2 2-week session day camps. That worked better than we'd ever expected, and the result has given us many new ideas to do it even better in the future. We had an empty camp after LDP, so we ran 3 short weeks of staff camp. These teenagers were invited to stay at camp for free for 4 days. During these days, they worked hard at digging, pulling stumps, splitting wood, pulling weeds, painting and staining, and doing numerous other site jobs. And in the evenings, we led sessions and led them in worship. And it was a great time to connect for us because these were the people that we would have hired had we run summer camp. So it was great being able to connect and minister to them as they helped us this summer. And finally, we have Beyond, a new online platform that contains all of the video production work that we did this summer and will contain all of the work we do in the future. Our plan is to constantly have new material ready to watch throughout the year. This will remain in place even when things get back to normal, because essentially this will be the library for everything Winkler Bible Camp. So check it out on wbcbeyond.com. Well, that brings us through summer to September. By this time, all our fall rentals had essentially been canceled. We did, however, have a few rentals, but far from anything normal. Our fall supper that we decided to run as a drive-through, and we served 624 guests in 2 hours, and that worked fantastic. Our November banquets that we had to be canceled, so we decided to do another drive-through. We had no idea what to expect, so we made 500 meals and we prayed that people would come. Well, we served those 500 meals in 1 hour, and then we turned away almost 200 guests. And then December arrived. All of our Christmas banquets that we normally host and cater were canceled. So we decided to do another drive-through and add some lights. Once again, we had no idea what to expect. We'd never done this before. So 500 meals wasn't enough in November. Let's do 1,000, we thought. But will the people come? So we prayed. That night was very, very encouraging. I was out near the highway directing traffic and greeting our guests, and everything started like every other event does. The cars just come rolling in. But that night, it was different. It just never stopped. Less than an hour after we started our event, we had to scramble to create new lines to get people off of the highway and onto our site. After we did all that we could do, we still had lines over a mile long down the highway. In 2 hours, we had served our 1,000 meals, and then we had to turn away hundreds of vehicles. As Candace and I had to apologize to all these people and tell them that we were out of food, the blessings just didn't stop. As we gave them the bad news, most of our guests responded with, "Wow, this is amazing." And then they proceeded to hand us their donation anyway, because it wasn't about the food. The amount of support that we have seen from the surrounding community this past year has been incredible. Our annual budget for 2020 was about $1.3 million, and about 3/4 of that is self-earned revenue. For us in 2020, most of that revenue was taken away due to the pandemic. The increase in donations this year has not only helped keep it all moving for us, but we've been able to improve our facility at the same time. However, we're not out of this yet. Right now, we are preparing to do something for 2021 because we believe that we can run camps safely, even with some level of restrictions. We already know that it will be challenging. We already know that our rental income will be way down for this next year, but we're not discouraged, and here's why. A number of months ago, I was listening to a leadership video on leading through these times of crisis. And the speaker raised a very important question that I believe needs to be asked by all of us. The question was this: are we going to be defined by the circumstances we find ourselves in, or rather, are we going to be remembered by the way we decided to respond to the circumstances around us? Well, as a follower of Christ, there is only one right answer, because our circumstances should never define us. It's the person of Christ that we have placed our faith in that defines us. I believe that. As an organization, we embrace that, and that is how we want to be remembered as we move into this next year. Again, thank you for supporting this ministry, and thank you for believing in this ministry.
Well, good morning. Glad that you've joined us today. You can turn in your Bible or on your smart device tab over to Luke 23, the Gospel of Luke, chapter 23. That's where we will be. As you're doing that, just a couple of announcements, things to let you be aware of. The first is that if you're watching today on Sunday, January the 24th, I invite you to join us at 11 a.m. for our coffee talk. The Zoom was emailed out last week, so hopefully you're able to join us for that. Today is the last day for you to give us nominations, suggestions for leadership board. So if you can email those in or call Ken Fraze to give you those names, we would greatly appreciate that. And then we were talking going into Christmas that we wanted to do a gift to our town and surrounding area of a dozen cookies. And obviously because of COVID restrictions, we weren't able to do that. And now we're looking at doing that for February as part of Valentine's Day and a sermon series that we're going to be starting that morning on Sunday, February the 14th. On the the Old Testament book of Ruth. And so more information will be coming out in the next couple of days for you on that, on all those instructions, and then eventually with a recipe. And so keep paying attention for that, and invite you to join in on that piece of loving our community. We have been doing a sermon series called It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine. And I think no matter who you are, whether you're a Christian or even if you don't believe in Jesus, or you're asking questions about Jesus and faith, there's a point in our lives where I think all of us ask the question, is this the end of the world? You know, we look at the events that are taking place in the world, whether it's across the world, whether it's in our own province, in our own lives. We look at those things and we think that it seems like to many of us that life is just not getting better. It's getting worse. And the reality is we all want life to get better. Every generation wants this season of life to be better than the previous generation. And the reality is, as much as we want things to get better, as much as we want a better life than previously, it seems that things are not getting better. 2 weeks ago, we saw that our attempts to do life without God lead to things getting worse. And then last week, we looked at the fact of what it looks like when the end will come. And the big question for many of us is how and when will the end of the world come? How and when? What will it be like? And what Jesus does is he calls us to focus on who and why, not how and when. Because all too often as followers of Jesus, we're more concerned, or we become so consumed about how it will end and when it will end. And Jesus says it's more important for us to focus on who. And the who is Jesus himself. The end of the world is all about him. And the why is that God is restoring everything back to the way things were before sin entered, before Genesis chapter 3, before the fall of humanity. And so until that day happens, until the day that Jesus returns, you and I are left waiting. And as we wait, we look at our world and we notice that our world is filled with evil. The passage that we looked at last week from the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is talking about the end. And he says one of the things that will happen is that there will be evil, and it will seem like evil is becoming more rampant. It's getting worse. And for some people, it might even feel like right now is that reality, that evil is getting worse. And as evil gets worse for some people, for many of us, maybe even for you, it feels like evil is winning, that somehow evil is winning and God is losing. Robert Nash was a philosophy professor at a seminary in the United States, and he said this about evil: every philosopher believes that the most dangerous challenge to theism was, is, and will continue to be the problem of evil and suffering. What Nash is saying is that the biggest challenge to what we believe about God, and theism is what you and I believe about God, and it's not just Christianity, it's any religion, any God, even the fact that if you think you are a God, the biggest challenge to that is evil and suffering. And you don't have to be an expert in philosophy to know that evil and suffering are a challenge. You just have to wake up every morning and look at the news, or open your Twitter feed, or whatever you use to gauge on what's happening in the world, and to look at that and you see that evil and suffering seem to be winning. Whether it's domestic violence, racial inequality, rioting, people storming government buildings, human trafficking, child pornography, terrorist attacks, you name it, evil exists. And all of us, no matter who we are, it doesn't matter how old we are, whether we believe in Jesus or not, we all want evil to end. And as much as we want evil to end, it feels like evil is winning. Why is evil winning? Or maybe the question that you're asking isn't about why is evil winning in the world. The question isn't why is there so much evil around the world, so much death and violence. Maybe the question that you're asking hits a little closer to home. It has more to do with your life. It's the question of, why do I have cancer? Or why am I still single? Why did my child die so young? Why did I lose my job? Why do I have to suffer, God? Explain to me, God, why I have to endure suffering in my life. You see, we don't just wrestle with evil in the world. We also wrestle with, why do bad things happen to good people? Kerry Newhoff, he's the teaching pastor of Connexus Church in Ontario. He makes the point that when we become Christians, when we start following Jesus, we don't get a suffering exemption. In fact, more often than not, our suffering increases. That when we follow Jesus, we actually end up suffering more, which might have you asking the question, why in the world would I ever want to follow Jesus? The reality is, life is a struggle between good and evil. All of life is a struggle between good and evil. If you look at any story, if you look at any movie, any good story is based on the premise of the struggle between good and evil. Now, unlike a movie, our lives don't resolve the tension between good and evil in 90 to 120 minutes. Our lives, the struggle continues every day. And so what do we do about this? Where can you and I go to find some help? Where can we go to find some answers? Where can we go for hope? Because the reality is, all of us need help. All of us want answers. And all of us long for hope in this constant struggle between good and evil. And I believe that the best place, not just one of the places, but the best place that you and I can go is the Bible. Now, as I say that, I want to recognize and acknowledge that not all of us, not all of you watching, might feel or believe that the Bible is the best place to go. You might feel that the Bible is irrelevant, that it's antiquated and old and has nothing to say about life today. It has nothing to say, it doesn't speak into what it means to deal with evil and suffering today. But the Bible is filled with examples of evil and suffering. And for those of us who are Christians, we understand and we know that our hope is found in Jesus, whose story is in the pages of the Bible. And one of the passages in the Bible that perhaps has the most to tell us about hope in the midst of evil and suffering is from a moment in Jesus' life when his followers thought that evil was winning and that God was losing. It's the day that Jesus is crucified. It's the day that Jesus is nailed to a Roman cross and he dies. So let's look at what Luke writes in Luke chapter 23, starting with verse 1. Then the entire council took Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. So the Roman Empire has already for years invaded Israel, and they've taken control, and life is dictated by Rome. And so the Jewish religious leaders bring Jesus to Pilate, hoping that this foreign government that they hate will deal with Jesus. Many of us know at least some of the details of Jesus' life, and some of you maybe know the life of Jesus quite well because you've read the Bible or you've been to church. And one of the things that we see through the Gospels, through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John writing the details of Jesus' life, is that as Jesus begins to do ministry, and as he teaches and he performs miracles, the Jewish religious leaders begin to distrust and then hate Jesus. They become jealous and fearful of him. It's amazing that when we feel threatened by someone, by their popularity, or that they just seem to be better than us, we begin to look for ways to harm them. And that's what the Jewish religious leaders do with Jesus. And so they bring Jesus to Pilate. They began to state their case. This man has been leading our people astray by telling them not to pay their taxes to the Roman government, and by claiming he is the Messiah, a king. And so the religious leaders, the case that they make to Pilate is that Jesus is telling his own people, the Jewish people, to not pay their taxes to Rome, which is a lie. Jesus never advocates for not paying your taxes. In fact, at one point in his life, in his ministry, someone comes to Jesus and says, "What should we do about paying our taxes to Rome?" And he takes a coin and has them look at the coin, and what's on the coin, and it's Caesar's head. And so Jesus' response is, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar." In other words, pay your taxes. And so here we see that Jesus, God's Son, has evil heaped on him. He's not exempt from evil. Keep reading verse 3 and 4. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said it." Pilate turned to the leading priests and to the crowd and said, "I find nothing wrong with this man." And so Jesus is talking with Pilate. Pilate is asking him questions. And Pilate begins to realize very quickly that there is nothing to the claims that the Jewish religious leaders have made about Jesus. He finds nothing wrong with him. Then they became insistent. The crowd or the religious leaders become insistent. But he is causing riots by his teaching wherever he goes, all over Judea, from Galilee to Jerusalem. So their lie about not paying taxes doesn't work. So now they accuse Jesus of causing riots. And not once did Jesus cause a riot. We know that people flocked to Jesus. They wanted to hear him. They wanted to see him. They wanted miracles to be performed in their lives. And so hundreds, thousands of people would come and see Jesus. At one point, we're told that a crowd of up to 10,000 people came to see Jesus one day and hear him teach. And he performs a miracle and feeds them all with just a couple of loaves of bread and some fish. But Jesus never starts a riot. And so some of us might be thinking, how can God let this happen? How can God let the people tell lies about his own son? We might think the same thing about events that take place in the world. How can God, a good God, allow evil to take place in this world, like human trafficking or domestic violence and all those, racial inequality, all those things? Or maybe, again, it becomes a little bit more personal for us. Maybe for us the question is, how can God let me have cancer? How can God let my marriage fall apart? How can God let me be single when everyone else around me seems to be getting married? We wonder, how can evil take place to good people? Let's keep reading what Luke writes. So Pilate writes, "Oh, he is a Galilean." And so when they said that he was, Pilate sent him to Herod Antipas, because Galilee was under Herod's jurisdiction. And Herod happened to be in Jerusalem at the time. What we see here taking place is that Pilate recognizes that he doesn't have jurisdictional authority over Jesus, because Jesus is from Galilee and he has no authority over Galilee. Herod does. And so he sends Jesus to Herod. Now, we're not going to read all of that. You can read that yourself. But Jesus comes to Herod, and Herod asks him a bunch of questions, and Jesus won't respond. And so then Herod and his soldiers mock Jesus a little bit. And then he sends him back to Pilate. And then Pilate interviews him some more. And then Pilate says this to the religious leaders: "You brought this man to me, accusing him of leading revolt. I have examined him thoroughly on this point in your presence and find him innocent." Herod came to the same conclusion and sent him back to us. Nothing this man has done calls for the death penalty. So ultimately Pilate says, listen, I've examined him. I've done a thorough examination. Herod has done the same thing. And neither of us find anything to what you're saying. We don't believe the accusations that you're making. We're going to let him go. And that might, for some of us, it might look like finally good is winning, right? Evil's losing. It looks like Jesus is going to be set free. And then if we keep reading what Luke writes, we see that a mighty roar arose from the crowd. With one voice, they shouted, "Kill him and release Barabbas to us." Barabbas was in prison for taking part in an insurrection in Jerusalem against the government and for murder. It was Roman custom in that day that one prisoner would be released during the celebration of the Jewish Passover, which is what's taking place at this time. And so after Pilate declares that he's going to release Jesus, the people cry out and they want Pilate to release Barabbas to them. Barabbas is someone who deserves to die. He led a revolt, a riot against Rome, which was a common thing to take place. And he's been accused of murder, probably because he killed Roman soldiers. This is someone who deserves to die. And yet, though that's the person that the Jewish people want released. Pilate argued with them because he wanted to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the third time he demanded, "Why? What crime has he committed? I have no reason to sentence him to death." So I will have him flogged, and then I will release him. And so again, Pilate says, listen, there's no reason for me to sentence him to death. He's done nothing wrong. I'll just, punish him lightly with some lashes and send him on his way. Again, the mob shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die as they demanded. Not only is Jesus sentenced, and then he said, and as they requested, he released Barabbas, the man in prison for insurrection and murder. But he turned Jesus over to them to do as they wish. This is evil upon evil, right? Not only is Jesus sentenced to death, but Barabbas is released, right? The guy who deserves to be nailed to a Roman cross for treason against Rome, for acts of violence against the Roman Empire. He's the one that the people want released. If there is injustice taking place, if evil is winning, it is right here. This is the moment. And so Jesus is led off to be crucified. And Rome required that if you were being crucified, that you had to carry your own cross to that place. And as Jesus is carrying his cross and on the way to that place, there's women and people who are lining the street, and the women begin to weep. They're crying because they're overcome with grief at Jesus' impending death. And so then Jesus says this to them. But Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, 'Fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs that have not borne a child, and the breasts that have never nursed.' People will beg the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and plead with the hills, 'Bury us.'" And ultimately what Jesus is saying is, if you think it's bad now, just wait. He says it's only going to get worse. There's a season that's going to come where people are going to wish that they could not have children. They don't want to bring children into this kind of environment. And again, maybe that's how some people feel today. This is like, why would I want to bring a child into this environment? And some people are going to wish that they could die. They call on the mountains, "Follow us, bury us." And some of you can identify with that in some way. Things have been bad in your life. And the thought of living another day is hard. You probably aren't thinking of ending your life, but it's hard to envision living in this environment. And then Jesus says this, "For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" The tree is Jesus himself. And so the fact that the tree is green means that Jesus is present, he's on earth. And what will happen when the tree is dry, when he is no longer on earth? And so again, Jesus is alluding, he's foreshadowing to the fact that things are only going to get worse. I don't know about you, but doesn't it make it hard to believe that Jesus is our hope? Right? I said at the beginning that as followers of Jesus, as Christians, we believe that Jesus is our hope. And how is it possible to have hope when it seems like evil is winning? How do we have hope when it feels like evil is winning? Well, after this, Jesus is taken to the skull, the place outside Jerusalem where Rome would crucify people every day. And he's nailed to a cross to die. Jesus' body is nailed to a cross. And do you know what he says? What his next words are? He says this, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." And then the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Jesus is nailed to a cross for a crime he doesn't commit. This is an injustice. Evil is being heaped on Jesus. And his response is to say, "Dad, God, will you forgive them?" What would your response be if you were being punished unjustly? Like if evil was being placed on you, you're dealing with something that you shouldn't have to deal with. It wouldn't be, "Father, forgive them." I think mine would be, "Father, deal with them, maybe even kill them." Because again, this feels like evil is winning. How is Jesus our hope? Let's jump to verse 48. So Jesus has died. And when all the crowd that came to see the crucifixion saw what had happened, they went home in deep sorrow. It was common for people to come and watch a crucifixion. And so Luke tells us that everyone who had come out from Jerusalem to watch, they're overcome with deep sorrow. And these are all people who have watched Jesus for the last 3 years. These are all people who have heard him teach. They've listened to him. They've watched him perform miracles. They believed that he was hope. They believed that he would make their life better, that he would lead them as a nation out of oppression from Rome. And now he's dead. Their hope is dead. They're overcome with deep sorrow. And it's not because an injustice has happened. Their deep sorrow isn't because an injustice has happened. Their deep sorrow is because they feel like God has lost. And it's not even that God has lost, but it seems that God has abandoned them, that somehow God has turned his back on them. And some of us can identify with that feeling. You look at the world and the events that are taking place, you watch the news and the violence that's taking place, you hear how people are treating each other, especially on social media, how people just say things without caring what they're saying. People who are supposed to be loving, even sometimes followers of Jesus, say things that are hurtful. Or you look at the pain that you're experiencing in your own life, and it feels like evil is winning. And worse yet, it feels like God has abandoned you. While to us it seems like God is losing, well, to you and I, it looks like God is losing and God has abandoned us. God is present. And not only is God present, but God is actually winning. God's not losing. In this moment, when Jesus dies on the cross, he is winning. Some of you might know who Muhammad Ali is. He was an amazing boxer in the 1960s, and he was known for the rope-a-dope move, where he would allow his opponent to take some jabs and some punches, and they would begin to think that they were winning the fight, that they had the upper hand on Muhammad Ali. And then at the right moment, he would land this knockout punch, and he would win the fight. That's what God did at Jesus' crucifixion. It looked like evil was winning. It looked like God was losing the fight. And at the right moment, he moves in and he delivers this knockout punch that ends the fight. The knockout punch is that when evil thought it was destroying God, God offers us salvation. In offering us salvation, God wins. You see, all this evil was brought on Jesus. And evil thought it was winning. And God turns and uses it to accomplish his purposes. And the same is true in your life and my life. God looks at what evil is doing in our life, and there is no punch that evil can throw in your life and my life that will knock him out. God will knock out evil with one punch. All through the Bible, we see that when people think that evil is winning, when they think that God is losing, that really God is using that to his advantage, to his purposes. And a great example of that is the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. If you've never read the story of Joseph in the book of Genesis, I encourage you to do that. We don't have time to look at all the details of Joseph's life, but he is the youngest son of 12 boys, the youngest son of Jacob. There's 11 brothers ahead of him, and Jacob loves Joseph more than any of the other boys, and they all know that. And so one day his brothers decide that they're going to kill Joseph. But one of them convinces them, let's not kill him, let's sell him into slavery. And eventually Joseph ends up in Egypt. And when he's in Egypt, he's accused of a crime that he didn't commit. And he's thrown in jail and he's forgotten about in jail. Right? Evil upon evil is put on him. And then one day Joseph is put in charge of Egypt's food supply. Time passes. And his brothers show up. They don't recognize him. And he plays a trick on them. And then eventually he reveals his identity to his brothers. And he says this to them in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. What Joseph says is, from your perspective, this was evil. It wasn't good. But from God's perspective, it was to his advantage. He used it for his purposes. It might seem like evil is winning, that God is losing, whether it's in the world or in your life. But trust me, evil always loses. So if evil loses, why not join God in what he's doing? In all of the events that happened to Joseph, he could have become bitter. He could have become angry and resentful to God. He could have walked away from God. But instead, he joined God and amazing things happened. And each of us, you and I, have the same choice to make. We can allow evil to make us bitter and angry and resentful. It can lead us to walking away from God. Or in the midst of those moments, those seasons of life, we can choose to partner with God and see God throw some amazing knockout punches. So what does that look like? Well, it means that when we see evil, whether it's in the world or in our community or in us, because evil is in all of us, we separate ourselves from evil and choose to do good. So as you look at your life, your situation, where can you do some good with God? And it means we trust Christ, whether it's letting him have full control of our life or control of the response that we have to events in our life, and be like Joseph. Because trust me, evil loses all the time. We bow with me as we pray. Heavenly Father, some of us maybe are struggling right now because it seems like evil is winning and you are losing. But the truth is, you don't lose. Evil doesn't win. You leveled the knockout punch through Christ, through Jesus' death on the cross. And I pray that we would see that and we would choose, in the midst of what seems hard right now, in the midst of evil and suffering, that we would choose to partner with you and allow you to throw that knockout punch and do some amazing things. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.